Eric here with you for round 2 of our CCMR weathering series. And today's subject will be this Illinois Central Boxcar. I picked this car up as a train show, kind of mentioned a few weeks back when I did an intro to the weathering series. And yeah, I picked it up mainly because it is possibly one of the most boring looking rail cars you could ever imagine having on a layout. But the virtue for me is that this car is just waiting to have interesting weathering done to it. The goal here, again, is not to make this car into an absolute rust bucket. That will not be my objective in this case. Rather, the objective will be to give it some character and personality to kind of mimic what a boxcar of this type would look like, maybe about midway through its career before it starts to get particularly gnarly. So weathering boxcars is kind of a lot of fun. You have a lot of surfaces to work with, and you have a roof that, if you've ever managed to stand on an overpass and watch a train go by underneath, tends to contain all sorts of interesting patterns of rust depending on the panel design and depending on the age of the car. This is galvanized metal on top. Here, what you can see is that the roof is painted identically to the car itself. So we're going to do a little bit of modifying of the roof color to start to suggest that if it began in this state, then certainly some of that paint is beginning to foul and the roof is beginning to corrode as a result. The other key aspect of it is the rest of the design here. Of course, with boxcars, there are a lot of different things you can do. You can patch them, you can rust them, you can modify all sorts of things. I'm going to keep this in the Illinois Central livery that you see here. As with the first video, the goal here is not for me to teach you how to weather cars. I'll show you how I do this. But the key thing I've noticed watching tons and tons of videos on weathering is you can actually do a variety of different techniques that land you in exactly the same place. In other words, if you were to look at any couple of models from two individuals, you get the same outcome. But if you watch the video, you see distinctive ways of getting there. And I think that's actually really important, just coming from the perspective of an individual, getting into this particular art and trying to identify, how do I actually go about weathering a rail car model, or how do I paint it or customize it in that way? And the honest answer is there are many right answers to that. And so it's possible that I will or won't use something here that other people swear by, and that's fine. For me, I kind of treat weathering like jazz a little bit. I have an idea of where I want to go, but I often leave the process itself to a bit of improvisation and a bit of inspiration. So what we're going to do is we're basically going to pull the wheels off, get this thing mounted up onto a stand, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm going to be using buff in order to fade the paint a little bit. In this case, buff will change the color of the car a tad. It'll make it a little bit warmer and maybe suggest a tad bit of dirt as well. As always, this is done using Tamiya paints, and Tamiya paints that are extremely thinned out. So that way, what I'm putting on here is mostly just a filter of color rather than putting on a hard deep color onto the car. with the first step out of the way with the sponge painting, next step is actually to show where the paint has come off enough to basically just reveal the galvanized metal itself. So I'm using flat aluminum from Tamiya, and this is basically going to be a very, very light dry brushing approach here. So getting just about all of the paint off of the brush. I've got a somewhat stiff bristle brush, and I'm basically just coming over the top, particularly to get that ribbing, because that would be most likely where you would see the most significant wear on the roof. And, you know, on top of that, as that brush moves across, it's also hitting other areas randomly. So you actually get kind of a nice aluminum chipping effect here, which is really, really helpful. Next, it's time to model some light corrosion on the roof. For this, I'm using a wet-on-wet approach. Dark earth is the color, and so I've already wet the roof with water. And at this point, now I'm taking a fine brush. This is somewhat diluted, I should say, Vallejo. And then I'm basically just spotting in the dark earth, as you can see here. And I'm kind of just letting it run to where it wants, you know, with the idea that I'm looking for where some of the flat aluminum is here, and then I'm basically just tapping in little bits of what looks like light corrosion in those areas. So focused particularly on where the ribbing is, you know, where it looks like from the other colors of paint that there's the most fouling of the roof paint, in other words, the wear of the roof paint. And then I'm accentuating those areas. And, you know, the beautiful thing about wet on wet is as long as you keep that surface wet, or even re-wet it in some cases, you can just keep sort of coming back and reworking a spot. If you don't like what you have, you can basically just dilute it out with water. And so you can see here, in some cases I'm, you know, creating corrosion that looks like it passes along an entire strip of the roof. In other cases, just trying to concentrate it right directly underneath those sort of X-shaped ribs where water might collect. And, you know, the beautiful thing about the approach is because you're using water, you can automatically just sort of let the paint think like water does and go where it wants to go, and then observe the effect and see if that's something that you like. Yeah, I think this is looking pretty nice here. You can just kind of see the addition of all of those effects creates some nice corrosion on there, little focal spots of corrosion, and otherwise just some very light levels of paint fouling and stuff like that. So this is exactly where I want to have this model. And it's a lot of fun. Honestly, this is almost like the most low risk, high yield process you can do with weathering. And already the car looks a ton better just having that variety. So what we'll do now is get this clear coated, and then we'll get to work on the rest of the car. All right, up next we're going to do some pin washing, and kind of like the bulkhead flat, I'm using the Tamiya panel line accent in black. This is a really nice product. Again, it flows really well on a clear coated car like this. And basically I'm going to use this on all of the ribbing of the car and all of the areas where there are panels. And that will really help to just create some depth and shadowing. Also hitting here a little bit of the top gutter between the roof and the body of the car. Anywhere where there might be shadow or depth, I've found this stuff is really nice. And once again, if you decide to use oil paints, that also works just fine. Up next, I am using some weathering pencils, so I've gone back to my AK Interactive pencil set. And here what I'm using is sort of a dark aluminum color that they include in the set, as well as some light grays, in order to basically just create dense dings and chips and highlights within the ribs of the car. And, the way that this stuff kind of works is you have once you put that pigment on, you can always just kind of revise it with a brush, or even you can wet it and it will do interesting things as well. And I'm also just kind of coming in here with these pigments and putting in scrapes and things like that into the car. And you can kind of see those showing up here. If you use a combination of some darker and lighter colors, you can actually create little bits of this denting. As you can see, I'm also just kind of hitting the ladders and grab irons for to show wear. So kind of a nice way, I think, brush that off a little bit, just kind of a nice way to maybe accentuate some wear in the paint on the model itself, and also just to expose a few highlights here. And you can kind of just experiment with this. I've only recently kind of been playing with these pencils, so just learning now about how they work. And in addition, what I've also got here is I've got one of these micron pens that I've talked about before, and this is actually beautiful for this type of process of basically creating little small points of chipping. I think this is better than pretty much any tool out there. And between using black, or in this case kind of an umber color, you can, especially in N scale, just put in tiny little divots and things like that. You also notice, I'm doing this right here just because I didn't quite like what I got, you can actually just take your finger then and sort of smear it down, and you actually can get really nice rust streaks that correspond precisely to where you put the pen. So in some ways this kind of beats the serendipity of sponge chipping, where you're using a sponge and you're getting patterns at random. Here, if you want to show, for instance, scraping where forklifts are used to open the door, or simply where something that's on the door impinges on the metal, and you can really do that nicely with these sorts of pens. So I actually really like this type of approach. And again, between this brown one and the black one in the set, you can get really nice chipping effects that are darker and lighter. And of course, what I'm doing is I'm concentrating on the side where the door opens out. That's where images of boxcars show the most damage. And so accentuating along the side to show where there are dents in the door, again from just being opened, shut, slammed, overly handled. You can really take a precision approach to adding in that type of weathering using this system. So I kind of like this. I can do a little bit more up here. Again, I'm not going to go absolutely haywire here, but I'm kind of just letting inspiration be my guide, doing it and having fun, and then seeing if I like it or not. And so far, so good. Again, a little bit of streaking here, and you put back a dot, and then it really does look like rust kind of streaking down from a dent or a chip in the paint. All in all, I'm pretty happy with that. So since I've got the micron pens out, I might as well just add a few scribble tags onto the car. A lot of the prototypes from the 2000s and onward, of course, have huge amounts of graffiti. And sometimes I'll do that just for fun. In this case, I'm really trying to keep this to like a mid-90s look, so probably a little bit less graffiti on it. And, all you need is just a few of these to really create kind of an accent point for the car. So basically just adding in some scribble art, maybe 2 or 3 little bits here and there. Again, I don't want to overdo things on this car. I think sometimes there's a lot of art and subtlety, so that looks pretty good. On to the next. So anyway, I've taken a look at the model, and going back to prototype, I've decided to add some more chipping into this, and in this case I am using the tried and true method of sponge chipping. So this is using German brown black, that is Vallejo color, and as you can see, I'm really taking my time here and taking it easy, kind of like for the roof. I want chipping in particular places with a sponge like this that is always not so easy. You just kind of have to concentrate your efforts at particular points on the model. Here the main focus is really the door. I mean, if you look at prototype photos of this type of car, man, the doors are dinged to hell. So my next step here is I am taking a very dilute Vallejo rust wash, and I'm using a wet on wet technique, somewhat similar to what I used on the roof, to basically show areas of corrosion on the door, particularly associated with the heavily chipped areas that you see right at the edge of the door where it's most likely to have been dinged. Also, I'm placing that same kind of effect on the tracks themselves, particularly this bottom track here where you would expect water would collect there, and so you would begin to see evidence of corrosion. And so it's creating a really nice sort of variation, as you can kind of tell here on those two lower panels where I've added the most rust. It's kind of nice sometimes when you have cars that have these sort of monotonous series of panels. Adding a little bit of variation in them is certainly kind of nice. In addition to the door area, I mentioned earlier about these areas of rust or dents and scratches on the paint job of the car on the side. So kind of the same again as I did on the roof. Where that is, I'm also adding in some of this diluted rust wash as a wet on wet in order to just create a little bit more accent around that, as well as to show where some of that corrosion actually comes down in the direction of water and colors or stains the surfaces beneath, kind of right on this one panel I was getting at right there. So again, more subtle effects, but I think these will really look nice once everything dries up here. So next I'm hitting the car with a bit of what some people would call like rail brown. This is sort of my variation on it. It is a mixture of Tamiya Hull Red with Tamiya NATO Black. And this is basically to mimic some of the kick-up that gets sprayed onto the car from going over the rails. So I'm basically using fairly low PSI here, and I'm keeping all of the shooting confined to the very lowest part of the car here, and particularly a little bit towards the edges and corners. This car, because of its light color, it shows that sort of dirt pretty readily, and so in the spirit of restraint, again, you have to be a little bit judicious about how much you apply here. This is diluted as before in something like 10 to 20 into IPA, or isopropyl alcohol. So I'm basically just being careful here, making sure I'm only shooting the areas I want and that I'm only shooting those areas enough to get the effect.